Come, sweet Sexton, tend my grave, by the author of Robert Maxwell as I knew him, and Captain Bob and me. Like all my books, this is a black comedy. It begins with a description of a certain Professor Isaac Stone, a thoroughly obnoxious American psychiatrist who arrives at the Rudyard Kipling Hospital overlooking St. Paul's Cathedral. He intends to visit a ghoulish and mysterious patient, a young and beautiful woman called Esmeralda Harris. Esmeralda has suffered from severe traumatic stress disorder after unexpectedly witnessing a truly horrible incident. The reader is kept guessing right up to the very end of the book as to what hideous thing Esmeralda saw, and finally the reader is beyond being shocked and nauseated. In short, he is dumbfounded. While talking to her recalcitrant psychiatrist, who has little patience for her, Esmeralda speaks about her close friend, a delightful raconteur called Charlie Yates, who tells black-humored and enthralling anecdotes to Esmeralda and her large circle of friends. Come, sweet Sexton, tend my grave comes to a tragic climax, which is more than sinister. It is nothing short of vile. Esmeralda and Charlie are curiously united under disastrous circumstances. So traumatized is Esmeralda that she is faced with no choice but to take her life. Now, this book has quite a good review, although it is somewhat short. It goes like this. This is a grisly but highly amusing and entertaining book. I couldn't put it down from beginning to end. Jason John Goldberg, Time magazine. This goes on this way. As previously stated, the story begins with a disagreeable psychiatrist's visit to a mental patient in hospital called Esmeralda Harris. Although he is a singularly unpleasant man, he is not devoid of sexual emotions. Esmeralda is beautiful, which causes him to have a hard-on. He tries to hide this by getting out his forbidden typewriter and starting to type, "The quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog." Esmeralda is given drugs, which only last for a short time. After that, she has painful withdrawal symptoms and can no longer speak to her psychiatrist. The first person to speak in the book is Esmeralda herself. She tells her psychiatrist about her passionate interest in death. In short, it is implied that she has necrophile tendencies and a penchant for Edgar Allan Poe's works. Death and beauty lie side by side, and of their union is sexual desire conceived, she tells her foul-tempered psychiatrist. Later she confesses, "Oh, how I love to be the center of attention." "Damn show-off," mutters the psychiatrist. Soon we get introduced to Charlie Yates himself, who sees a tragic side to all things grave. He describes the death of his close friend Douglas Cuthead and all the unfortunates on his hospital ward. There were 4 other men on Douglas Cuthead's ward, besides Douglas, begins Charlie. One was Fat Steve, who weighed about 30 stone and who defecated on the floor almost every night. Another man was known as Sweating Joe. Every evening he had diarrhea and wiped his bottom on the front page of the Daily Mail. Another man was called John Maguire. He was naked and emaciated and looked like something from a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. He frequently tossed off onto the front page of The Guardian. Added to these patients was Dying George, and last of all Douglas Cuthead. His condition and subsequent death was the most repellent of all. Charlie described his friend's death in detail, laughing throughout. "This is not a laughing matter," said Esmeralda to Charlie. "You're a fine one to talk," barked her psychiatrist rudely. "Show me your hand," said Charlie to Esmeralda. "Let me tell you your fortune." "What can you see, you horrible man?" asked Esmeralda. "Ha ha," said Charlie. "Your life will be saved by my bane." "In that case you'd better sharpen your wits," said Esmeralda rudely. She was corrected by Charlie's friend Stanley Trout, who described Charlie as being a pure treasure. Trout, an eccentric, was later stopped by the police in Birmingham for going the wrong way down a one-way street. "I was just sauntering down from London for a snappy farquette," he said. Then the book moves from Esmeralda's prose to Charlie's stories. The two have become friends. Charlie shares Esmeralda's obsession about death. He gets a job in a hospital and wanders into the mortuary. When questioned by the mortuary attendant, he says, "That's the first stiff I've seen since Lenin. Have you ever been to Moscow?" He makes friends with a hypochondriac who works in the post-mortem room. His friend is convinced that he has cancer of the throat and rings him up early every morning and says earnestly, "I'm going to do a spit." Charlie then tells his listeners that he was actually asked to work in a mortuary in Fulham. He is kept waiting outside in the sweltering summer sun while the mortuary attendant, a woman called Maggie, tries desperately to pin her lover down to a date. Eventually, Maggie lets him into the mortuary. Charlie gets an attack of nervous giggles. "You seem awfully stressed out," he comments, adding, "Is there a reason for this?" "Of course there's a bloody reason for this," shouts the mortuary attendant. "One of my psychiatrists is in Los Angeles, the other's in Connecticut." She adds peremptorily, "Don't just stand there. Let the undertakers in and give them the key to the freezer." This is the last contact that Charlie has with the dead. Another of Charlie's stories is entitled How Mr. and Mrs. Pleasure Dog Spent Christmas Eve. The Pleasure Dogs are retainers of what are referred to as the Lord and Lady of the Manor. Mrs. Pleasure Dog was sobbing her guts out. She opened her door to her former employers. When she is asked why she is sobbing, she says her husband had tied her up in the middle of the night and that he had done her in the garden shed. Charlie's listeners, including Esmeralda, roared with laughter. "He sure did know how to tell a sordid story," commented her odious psychiatrist disagreeably. He added, "That story gives me the creeps. It shows that you have abysmal tastes and equally abysmal friends." Esmeralda appeared undeterred. She tells her psychiatrist another of Charlie's stories. It is entitled How Kevin Flanagan Disgraced Himself at the Manor House. Kevin Flanagan, a manic-depressive barrister, had been invited to dinner at the Manor House. He was due to see the Lord and Lady of the Manor, and the Lord of the Manor, I might add, was the editor of the Buckinghamshire Echo. He was invited at 8 o'clock, but arrived at 11 o'clock. The Lady of the Manor was impatient and was lying on a sofa. She was angry and bored and was reading the New Statesman. "God, Hamlet was such a maddening young man," she muttered eventually. Flanagan was just as manic that night as he had been when he had last been sectioned. When the police came to arrest him, he sang a ribald song to the tune of the British Grenadiers. Some talk of Alexander and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander and pufters such as these, but of all the fucking pederasts there's none that can compare with a bloody effeminate copper and a wanking raging queer. That night Flanagan stormed up to the Lord of the Manor. "Not a bad rag, the Echo, what? some of your sub-editors' wives are bloody good fucks, he bellowed. Why in the world are you so late? Asked the lady of the manor mildly. My car broke down, blasted. It was the points, they needed greasing. Then you should grease your points more regularly, shouldn't you? She said. I'll grease my points, and if you're a good girl, I'll take you upstairs to your bedroom, and I'll give your points a good old greasing, shouted Flanagan. This is hardly the sort of conversation one expects to hear in a William Kent drawing room, said the lady of the manor, angrily. William Kent, William Kent, William bloody Kent, never heard of the wet fucker, shrieked Flanagan. Finally, Flanagan was asked to leave. He found a bright red coat on a chair in the hall. He chased the lady of the manor round the room with the agility of a matador, singing Toreador on guard, Toreador, Toreador. The lady of the manor rushed out of the hall and locked the door behind her. Another of Charlie's stories was entitled The Indiscretions of the Reverend Boyne, incorporating the burial of Sir Edmund Card. Paris Elliot, a likeable Cornishman, worked as a gravedigger with the Reverend Bernard Boyne. The two got on well together, but shared a hatred for a firm of funeral directors called Crumblebottom and Bongwit. Crumblebottom was persistently rude to Barris and addressed him as lackey. On this occasion, the funeral was taking place of the distinguished Sir Edmund Card, who was the mayor of Plymouth. As an act of revenge, Barris dug Sir Edmund Card's grave too short, so it was impossible to get the coffin into the grave. The Reverend Bernard Boyne also disgraced himself. While he was reciting prayers by the graveside, he suddenly rolled up his sleeve and gave himself a heroin injection. Couldn't you have had your injection some other time? Asked Crumblebottom. No, said the clergyman. There is blood on your garments. How did it get there? Asked the undertaker. The spike screwed up on me. When I shoot up, I usually do a clean job. What the devil do you mean when you shoot up? Asked the undertaker. I'm on heroin, and it's suckers like me who keep fuckers like you alive, said the clergyman. You're a sheer, utter disgrace to your cloth. What the fucking hell do you think it's for? Another of Charlie's stories is entitled The Kinky Bank Manager. Charlie began, I once worked for the manager of a NatWest bank. His name was Bobby Phillips. He was a right kinky bastard. He summoned me into his office. He was holding up a pair of pink ladies' knickers which were edged with lace. If I were to put these on, do you think I would fill them out nicely, he asked. What with, I replied. In addition, he gave one of his secretaries a tape to type. There was a ribald limerick at the end of the tape. A colonel there was from Belgrade who found a dead whore in a cave. He must have had pluck to have had a cold fuck, but think of the money he saved. Eventually, Phillips lost his position. Another of Charlie's stories is entitled The Debauched Psychiatrist. I knew a demented Harley Street psychiatrist. In order to put his patients at their ease, he swaggered into his consulting room, slapped his thigh, and said the following. Absolutely strapping stuff, sex, hey what? Do you want to know what I do afterwards? I bung my stinking carcass out of bed, wipe the spunk off my Hampton, crash into a bath, and go for a spiffing good run round the block. Then I bugger up to the kitchen, where I make 4 socking good crumpets, all of them absolutely squelching with butter. After I've eaten them, I bowl upstairs to my bedroom, and I start all over again. What? Understandably, he was struck off the medical register. Another of Charlie's stories, this one is quite short, and it is entitled The Tradesman's Entrance. I heard about an odious Harley Street gynecologist whose name was Brendan Ryan. Apparently he was incompetent, coarse, clumsy, insolent, arrogant and sadistic. He spoke with a heavy Irish accent. He said to several patients, "If your front entrance is indisposed, you need feel no qualms about using the tradesman's entrance, but would you be sure to grease your partner's member if you've just passed the motion?" He got struck off too. So then, Doctor, these were some of the stories which Charlie Yates told, said Esmeralda. My friend Annabella Sykes and I were out of work, so we delighted in attending post-mortems at Bede's Hospital. Dr. Spearpoint was the man who was lecturing medical students about the dead bodies. He had a half-witted assistant called Evans. Spearpoint was speaking about an 88-year-old man who had died of cancer of the lung. He asked his assistant to pass him the correct lung from a tray. That's the wrong lung, you fucking fool," he shouted. The medical students were in stitches. Unfortunately, there had been no sign of Charlie recently. His best friend, Stanley Trout, said that he had been confined to bed with agonizing headaches. It transpired that Dr. Spearpoint was lecturing his students about a young man with a brain tumor one morning. Charlie's body was brought into the post-mortem room. I recognized it immediately. I was so shocked that I caused a commotion. Charlie's brain fell from a tray onto the floor, and onto it fell a hatchet, which the assistant had been using. I fainted, and my head hit the brain, just missing the hatchet. Well, 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 your life was saved by his brain, said Spearpoint's assistant, blowing stale beer into my face. I remembered that Charlie had once said, "Your life will be saved by my brain," a long time ago. Anyway, that's all I can remember before they brought me to this room. I can't comment on your ghoulish adventures, Esmeralda, other than to say you're a morbid little brat, said the psychiatrist. I've had enough of your disgusting insolence, Doctor, shouted Esmeralda. She added, "Fuck off, you obnoxious, repulsive yank." This is the last we see of Esmeralda. She opened the window, eased herself onto the ledge, and as the ground moved towards her, she smiled. Do enjoy your read.